And one thing I think I didn't say, so I'll say it now, about a core dimension of purpose is that it contributes to long-term well-being of people and the planet. That's purpose at an organisational level. And I really credit Dr. Victoria Herr, who's based at the University of Cambridge, with shaping my thinking. And she would be underlying that as a core dimension of a true organisational purpose.
Sarah, you are very welcome to the ScaleX Insider Podcast. Absolutely delighted and thrilled to have you on the show today.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Thank you very much, Brendan.
You're so welcome. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We are very aligned on our vision to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small and medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So, Sarah, to open up the show as I always do, what does scaling with purpose mean to you?
Well, it's an exciting journey to go on, whether you're an individual or looking at purpose as a team or as a whole organisation. So if I just speak briefly to each of those three levels, scaling with purpose at an individual level is about more aliveness, more life energy that you can express in your day-to-day work. With a team, it's about coming into alignment, pulling in the same direction, getting through turf wars or personality clashes or silo working in service of something, of a shared purpose. And then at an organizational level, I think scaling with purpose is about going on a really ambitious journey that helps you as an organization to punch above your weight. So that's how I'd summarize it.
I love those leading self, leading others, leading an organization with aliveness, with alignment, and with much greater ambition. And we're going to dive deeply into that today. But I was fascinated when I was doing my research because I hadn't come across your work until recently. And for those listening, you won't be able to see me holding up Sarah's wonderful book, Powered by Purpose. And I know you've written other books as well, and we get into some of those later in the conversation. But this is a wonderful book. I encourage you all to go out and grab a copy. But it seems strange that someone with a background in street performing, who is a chartered psychologist and a dialogue coach, actually is now consulting with leaders of some of the highest profile organizations throughout the globe on the topic of purpose. So how has that come about?
Well, there have been a few chapters along the way. I'll try and keep it brief. So I am a psychologist by background, studied psychology at university. That was a near miss though, because I applied to do architecture. And right at the last minute, like just during my A-level exams, and this is what prompted in part my interest in dialogue and conversations, and we'll come on to talk about conversations about purpose. My mum unexpectedly confronted me over the dinner table and said, "I don't think you want to study architecture, do you?" And I went away and I shut down all my books. I was studying maths and physics and geography for A-level, had A-level maths the next day, shut down all the algebra books. And I just thought, she's right. And I felt this great weight lift off my shoulders. And I thought, I don't want to be an architect at all. I'm not really interested in floor plans. I'm much more interested in people. And so I was fortunate. I was able to switch the offer to studying psychology at the University of Nottingham. And it's relevant to the topic of purpose, because I think one of the simple things we can do to tap into our own purpose is to notice what energizes us, lights us up, brings us alive. And even though I knew very little about the academic study of psychology, just that weight lifting off my shoulders is a moment I'll always remember. And so that short conversation with my mum forked my life down a completely different path. We wouldn't be sitting here together talking about purpose had my mum not lent in, I think, with quite a lot of bravery to confront me. So that led me on to study psychology. I actually did a 4-year degree course. I spent the 3rd year in industry, and I was very fortunate because I got a job with the I got an industrial placement year with the top firm of business psychologists, Savile and Holdsworth Limited, SHL, and they threw me in with their graduate intake, treated me as a graduate. And so at the age of 19, I was out there getting a real taste for consulting work, going into different organizations, applying psychological insights to uplift performance, mostly through the use of psychometric tests and personality questionnaires. So when I went back to university, psychology made a lot of sense to me because I could see the direct application of science and insights in the workplace. So I already loved the subject, worked really hard, graduated with a first class honours degree, was offered a job to go back to SHL, which would have been the sensible thing to do. But, and this is where the next chapter comes into play, the spirit of adventure got the better of me, and I went to Spain. I thought to teach English for a year, widen my experience, live in the sunshine. I fell on really hard times, didn't really get a job teaching English, and set about learning to juggle because I was meeting lots of travellers and performers, and this was in the 1990s. So Thatcher's refugees, lots of travellers called themselves. Anyway, that then turned into 4 years of doing street circus. I'd planned to stay for a year, but I loved the art of how you create a show on the street in a random crowd. And I look back and I often think it's the best psychology I actually ever learned because it's such a raw art. So anyway, I'll pause there because that's already 2 chapters in.
I absolutely love that. There's so many different ways we can go here, but to kind of set the frame and the alignment with our own 10 principle ScaleX framework, your work speaks directly to those principles enshrined within the Inspire theme, the first phase of our ScaleX Accelerator program, which aligns its work to the 10 principles. That's psyche of the leader, which either empowers or disempowers their scaling ambition and trajectory, purpose and vision, and people. And hats off to Mrs. O'Donnell, who had the courage to ask the question, is this really what you want to do? And you've given us a sense of purpose being those activities that energize us, that support an increase in performance. But for those high growth potential SME leaders that are listening, what is it? What is purpose? How do you define it?
I define it as the enduring and meaningful reason that you exist. And that could be, again, at an individual, team, organizational level. And it's both very practical purpose because it can guide your day-to-day decision making, make it quicker and easier and clearer what you say yes to and what you say no to, which clients you work with, for example, and which ones you don't. And then it's also that meaningful and enduring reason to exist is also something aspirational. It's something that you work towards. It casts the direction for your work, your career, your company. So my own purpose is actually the subtitle of the Powered by Purpose book, which is energize people to do great work. And actually, I want to add an additional word, together. And that's the reason I do what I do. And sometimes I say a big yes to working with clients, and sometimes I say no, because I don't see the potential for great work, or it just doesn't energize me.
Yeah, I love that. And our own purpose, our organizational purpose, is to free business leaders from business limiting fears, to help them find the power of their own voice. Because what we found is lack of ambition of the leader is actually the single greatest impediment as to why there is only 0.5% of SMEs actually achieving scale. So this conversation is a really important one, because I feel that when leaders actually anchor their vision to a compelling purpose, something that energizes them, will then ultimately, as you've cited right at the outset, they'll feel more alive. They'll attract people who are more aligned to their own purpose, and ultimately they will have the courage to create a greater ambition. And ultimately bring their wonderful product or service to a wider world. So this is important, but we're both very aligned in this. But I mean, there are lots of cynics out there, and you've spoken to this as well, that will say, look, this is all kind of this is all corporate or consulting, nonsense. And of course, the topic of purpose is being tarnished by greenwashing those companies who have kind of felt, oh, quick, we need to pull together a corporate purpose. Let's stick something up on the website. What have you found? I mean, you published the book in 2020. Certainly, I first came to the whole topic of purpose and why it was important through Simon Sinek's work, Start With Why. In the 5 years since the book has been published, have you found that, is purpose just a fad, or what is the case for purpose? Let's start. I mean, we have business leaders listening. Let's start with the financial case. And I think that will ultimately get people either further engaged to all of the other benefits. But is there a financial case for actually taking the time to really understand purpose at both an individual level, a team level, and organizational level?
The short answer is yes. And I have the words of, he's the CEO of Kiwi Bank in New Zealand, ringing in my ears. I had the fortune to interview him. And the way that he summarized it is, we get profit through purpose. And at Kiwi Bank, they're really clear on their purpose, on what they call their purpose pillars, which then gives them a set of metrics by which to measure the impact of their purpose. And they produce all of that in their annual sustainability report, which is in the public domain that you can go and read. So I'm thinking there are individual organizations we could point to, but more than that, there has been a growing business case that purpose-driven companies do get strong financial results. Alex Edmond's book, Grow the Pie, which came out a year or two later than mine, I think crunches the numbers. I refer to some of the evidence base in my books, but he's an economist, and I think he presents the business case for purpose-driven business really well. And I think there's been a slow and gradual building of the business case. And as companies have got stronger financial results, whether that's Patagonia or Brompton Cycles, so that has generated more interest in the business community, that purpose isn't just something that's soft and fluffy or a nice to do, but it could actually generate competitive advantage. But what I would say in addition to that is that journey can take time. It certainly has in my own case. It's not going to be a quick win or a silver bullet, because the purpose has to be authentic, and there has to be genuine alignment in the organization amongst its stakeholders to deliver that purpose. And the other thing I'll just touch on really briefly is I think there has been a backlash against purpose in recent times, like there's been a backlash against DEI initiatives in organisations. And I think that's to do with the current political turbulence that's happening in the world. I think it's to do with cycles in business. Somebody reminded me recently, 5 years ago at Davos, one of the key speakers was, guess who? Greta Thunberg. Look at where we are now. The pendulum seems to have swung right the other way, or it feels like that in many ways. But I think with the younger generation coming through, with Gen Z, when they're coming into leadership positions, I really wonder whether the pendulum at some point, who knows when, might swing right back the other way, and actually purpose, values in an organization will be really back high on the agenda. But I acknowledge they're taking a bit of a knock at the moment.
So the financial case is there. There is lots of evidence out there, demonstrable evidence to suggest that those companies that have purpose at the heart of their organizations, at the center of the way they lead these organizations, ultimately are more profitable as a result, but it must be authentic. What are the other benefits of anchoring your vision and seeing your vision, creating an ambition for the future through a purpose lens?
Yeah, that's a good question, because of course it's not just about the stronger financial results, but it's about attracting and retaining great talent. And again, amongst younger people, there's a clear trend that they want to work for more purpose-driven companies. So a company, for example, like Unilever, comes up high on the league tables of where graduates want to work. There's also evidence of greater retention of employees as well, because I think purpose, again, when it's meaningful, when it's authentic, when it's truly lived, provides that sense of belonging that people want. And one thing I think I didn't say, so I'll say it now, about a core dimension of purpose, is that it contributes to long-term well-being of people and the planet. That's purpose at an organisational level. And I really credit Dr. Victoria Hirth, who's based at the University of Cambridge, with shaping my thinking. And she would be underlying that as a core dimension of a true organisational purpose. You can join the dots between the purpose statement that's hopefully being lived and long-term well-being. So again, Brompton Cycles, their purpose is to change the way people live in cities. And in the context of climate change and the environmental challenges we're happening, you can join the dots there. And so what an authentic and lived purpose does is it helps you attract the great talent, hold on to the great talent. It provides that sense of belonging. And there's evidence for other benefits as well, such as greater levels of innovation, because people, to come back to your word, are more inspired by what they're doing in their day-to-day work. So there's more of a flow of great ideas that leads to more innovation.
Yeah, I love this. So you've mentioned purpose statement. We've covered the what is purpose, the case for purpose. The way I host the podcast and what I always seek to deliver for those who take the time to listen And time, as we know, is the most valuable currency people have, is to ensure that they can take away actionable steps from the podcast. So let's get into the how. Let's kind of lead our listeners on a journey to get them to a stage where they're thinking about crafting a purpose statement if they haven't already done that. So where do we start? I mean, something you mentioned in Powered by Purpose is these kind of four capacities for purpose. Tell me about that, because it seems a strange word. The capacity, these capacities. What are they, and how do we embody those on a day-to-day basis in the context of leading purpose-driven companies?
So one of those capacities is about making dialogue authentic. So how do you have conversations in an organization about purpose? And in naming that capacity and working with it, I was influenced by some research by George Seraphim and colleagues, academics in the States. And they, back to financial results, if I may, for a moment. But what they found were that there were two key levers, if you like, that leaders could work with that would generate stronger financial results. And those two levers are our clarity of purpose. So you want to be having a purpose statement that is clear. I'm going to add repeatable, memorable for people, like, say, the one from Brompton Cycles, or the Patagonia one, we're in business of saving our home planet. You want to have that clarity. And then the other thing they found in their research was it is the engagement of middle managers in particular in conversations about purpose that really helps to unlock the potential of purpose. Great to have your senior leaders on board, that's of course really necessary, but you'll get a lot of bang for your buck if you really engage those middle layers, sometimes called the frozen middle in an organization, those managers who are often torn between meeting the demands of the board or the senior leadership team or the exec team, dealing with frontline staff as well. How you make purpose come alive for the people in the middle of an organization. And conversation is one of the tools for doing that. But again, I'm not talking about a fluffy conversation or just a talking shop, but a conversation that will actually have some teeth to it, so that people will go away from that conversation with a much clearer idea about what the purpose is, what it means for them in their day-to-day work and in their decision making. So, and within that capacity, in that context, there's all sorts of things that you could be doing.
We'll come back to how to have those wonderful conversations, because I know you've laid out kind of 7 steps to having conversations which lead to the, I suppose, the uncovering of your organizational purpose. What are the other capacities that that we should lean on in the context of, again, scaling with purpose?
So there's a capacity around engage your stakeholders, because again, the potential of purpose is that it can really unify your stakeholders, so you're pulling in the same direction, not having all the silo working and the turf wars. And I think we have to cast the net wide in terms of who we think about as our stakeholders. So of course there's the customers and clients, the beneficiaries of the business, the people that the company is there to serve. But of course there's also employees, and you could even widen it to the families of the employees as well. There could be the business owners, the regulators, the local community in which the business sits as well. And so how do you engage your ecosystem of stakeholders, again, in conversations about purpose? And some of those conversations could be quite crunchy. One of the topics on the corporate pitch that I work quite a lot with is what are some of the contradictions that we're seeing in terms of living our purpose? Because, as I said earlier, this is an ambitious journey to go on, and there will be mistakes being made or contradictions. So having that dialogue with the appropriate range of stakeholders is important. So that's another capacity. And then the other two, one of them is connect on purpose. And again, that's at the individual, team and organizational level. And maybe we could circle back to that, because there are tools you can use at those three levels. But the final capacity is, in a way, it's more difficult to articulate, but I've called it, empowered by purpose, cultivate leadership presence. And that is all about, and I think you speak to this in one of your principles as well, it's about the emotional connection to purpose. So it's about having some open-heartedness. It's about noticing what's going on in our guts, if you like, fire in the belly, because I think purpose isn't a heady, it can sound quite heady, but actually it's a sort of whole-bodied response to what we feel called to do, what we feel energized to do. And the best way I could frame that was around, presence, leadership presence. That means you can be open to what you feel the future is calling you to do. And you also have an orientation to serving other people, whether it's people or the planet. So there's that open-hearted energy in the presence we bring.
Again, so much in there, and I want to ensure that for our listeners, this doesn't feel overly abstract. So I love the contrasting examples of Patagonia and Brompton Cycles. We've had Vincent Stanley, who I think the cousin of Yvonne Chouinard, who wrote the wonderful book The Responsible Company. They won't even use the word sustainable because they said we're still net takers from the environment. We're not net givers, and until we're net givers, then they won't use the word sustainable. So they call themselves responsible. The best that they can be right now is responsible. Charles Conn, who's the chair of Patagonia, I've had on the podcast. It's a wonderful story of an evolution of purpose, where people see Patagonia now as this company that's, out there saving the world. But they didn't start there. They started with a rock climbing product. And their purpose was centered around their competence level in terms of making a better product that would do less harm to the environment. That then attracted people who were similarly motivated, which then began the origins of a culture around this company they called Patagonia. And as it became increasingly successful, they moved into creating this cause-based purpose of actually, ultimately saving the planet. And they're the ultimate exemplars in the fact that Yvonne Chouinard has gifted into trust Patagonia. And the beneficiaries of Patagonia's success now will be environmental causes, environmental activism. So that we've got that on the one side. Then we've got Brompton Cycles, and for those who are listening, you're not familiar with Brompton, think of those fold-up bikes. And if you've been around London or other big cities, you'll see people kind of carrying these cycles on and off the tubes, and so how have they arrived at a point where now they're leading this company and scaling with purpose, purpose being at the center of what they do. I mean, the guys and the girls on the factory floor are really, if we talk about, feelings and kind of what lights you up, and we have the potential of losing people on the factory floor because they're just going, look, just give me work to do. I want my 9 to 5. I want to get paid at the end of the week. I want to take, my family on holiday during the summer. I don't know about this purpose stuff. I'm just making bikes. What does it matter to me? So how do we have conversations with people at an individual level, right across an organization, if we can take the case study of Brompton Cycles, that then aligns teams and ultimately fortifies what we're trying to do at an organizational level in the context of scaling with purpose. That's a kind of a wide question, but let's take it at the factory floor level. Where do we start having conversations around organizational purpose, but that's meaningful at an individual level?
So let me come to that in a moment, that conversation starter, because there are very straightforward places to start. You're making me think, though, and about the importance of those conversations, because there's something that's been called the purpose gap hierarchy. And what that's referring to is if you go and talk with senior people in organisations about purpose, about 85% of them will say, yep, I'm finding purpose in my day-to-day work. Go to frontline workers, and that drops right down to 15%. Like, that's a huge gap. So I've got that in mind. And I also have met plenty of people in my life and my travels around different organisations who say, all I want to do is come to work, take home a paycheck, and that's good enough for me because, I want to provide for my family. And there's nothing wrong with that either. I just want to acknowledge that. And I think there is an additional piece here, which is that we're all human beings. And I think there is that desire within us to feel that we belong in our organisation and that we do something that matters. And so if we are going to start a conversation about purpose, one of the easy ways in my experience, is to open up with the question, when have you felt proud to work for this organisation, or felt proud about something you did in your work? And I can give you a quick example. And this is going into an FE college, a further education college recently, where, and this is a tricky sector, the FE, further education, very much the poor cousin of the university sector, the school sector. Anyway, we started the conversation right there with that question, and there were all sorts of stories being shared in the room. And then one of them, which was shared in the whole room, was somebody who had been teaching hairdressing for years and years. And he shared that he'd been walking along the street recently and somebody had kind of waved at him and flagged him down. And it had turned out it had been a former student from like 15 years ago. He's like, sir, do you remember me, sir? Anyway, this woman had gone on not only to fully train as a hairdresser, but she had also opened her own business and salon. And then she shared that she'd opened 6 salons in the local area and employed all these people. And this teacher was saying, not quite, my work is done, but he was so lit up by the fact that he'd had that impact, because what they're looking to have is a sustainable long-term impact through educating kids And so you can get those kinds of stories in the room, and that creates a real buzz. And that lovely glow of pride, healthy pride, is infectious. And that then sparks inspiration for other people in the room. So that's a great place to start a conversation about purpose.
I love that question. When did you last feel proud of the work that you're doing here? You know, so that suggests to me that you, this will start to, for people right at the start of this journey, that's a wonderful place to start without even talking about purpose, to provide kind of ingredients that will start to inform the purpose statement. So where to next?
So there's a physiology to purpose, and it's good to get that in the room, that buzz, that hum through that question. Another place I often go, and this is having worked with a number of SMEs around defining their purpose, is I often get people to do a bit of prep before they come to the session. So I ask people to think about an object that they could bring to this purpose workshop or purpose discovery session, however you want to frame it, that would in some way reflect or symbolize the work that the organisation does, again, that they're proud of or that has a positive impact. And I love the creativity that people bring to that. So some people will simply print out an email from a raving fan or a bit of unsolicited feedback from a customer that kind of made their day. I've had other people write poems about the organisation, and we've all enjoyed the rhyming couplets or whatever's come through that. One person brought in quite a big watering can because she was saying, well, you know, this organization really nurtures and nourishes its clients. And what that's doing on a more subtle level, and I'm going to speak like a psychologist just for a moment here, is our brain has got these two hemispheres, as many of us know, and that left hemisphere is more about the logical, analytical side, but it's really good to activate the right hemisphere that is a bit more creative, a bit more oblique sometimes in the connections that it makes. It's more attuned to rhythm as well. So I'm often looking to bring in some right hemisphere thinking or beingness into the room, because actually, if you're then later on in a session looking to uncover an organizational purpose statement, you want a bit of spark and flair, and you can seed that early on.
I absolutely love this. I can feel myself in that room and the richness of those stories that are just being told, not in a corporate way, not in a very well refined purpose statement that's been drafted, 37 times by the marketing department and checked for the SEO pickup on it. These are just kind of authentic, rich stories that give organizational leaders a real sense of why people are working here, why they're connected to this organization. So we're just building on the richness of that initial question. What else?
What a Oh, well, I sometimes use the very well used Ikigai model, of those overlapping circles. I'm sure many listeners will be familiar with the dimensions of Ikigai around, what energizes us, what we're great at, what we can earn money for, and what our corner of the world needs as well. And so I often use that framework, having sparked right hemisphere thinking as well. And again, there's a psychological principle here that's useful to be aware of, and that is that it's very good to give people time and space to do some individual thinking before you share. And so there's a wonderful book called The Wisdom of Crowds. And I think it opens with a take on what psychologists call the jelly bean principle, which is the classic experiment with the jar of jelly beans, where it turns out that if you ask a group of people to estimate the number of beans in the jar, the arithmetic mean is the one that is typically more accurate than any single individual. So this is pointing to collective intelligence being greater than the individual intelligences. But there is a catch. And the catch is, well, there are a number of conditions, but one of the key ones is that you need to get people to write down their estimate individually first before you move to aggregating or working out the mean. Because if you just plow in and get everything all merged and meshed early on, you lose some of the richness of the divergent individual thinking. And so I'm often using the jelly bean principle, including with conversations about purpose. So we want to have the conversation, but you also want to give people time to reflect. For example, using that Ikigai framework before you then bring people together to have the discussion, have the dialogue, so that the collective wisdom can be greater than each individual person's thinking, and everybody can leave the room feeling more lucid, and they've arrived, for example, at an organisational purpose that they never would have arrived at by any one individual person thinking alone. It comes.
Yeah. Again, I mean, this is so rich. So I have a kind of a vision in my head, again, leaning on the the three words you used right at the outset in the context of kind of leading self before you lead others, before you lead an organization. I think of, scaling yourself with purpose creates this aliveness, is the word that you've used. So I'm putting myself in that room. I can feel part of this conversation. I'm thinking of, bringing the object in that I want to speak about, and I can feel the aliveness within the room. How do we take it then up a step so that we bring together all of these individuals who have cited something very personal to them in the context of what they're proud of, what energizes them in relation to their work for this organization? How do we bring it up a level to a team where we start to create a level of alignment with all of these kind of individual citations of what we will call purpose?
So, God, it's such an emergent process. I'm just going to say that because every time I do a consulting project, yes, there are tools and frameworks that I draw on or questions that we've been exploring. And yet it's always its own dance as well. So I just want to acknowledge that, and I think this is some of the challenge, some of the opportunity, some of the joy is to work with that emergence live in the room. I loved what you were saying, Brendan, about crafting a purpose statement that's coming out, that's really lighting up the people who are going to have to live the purpose statement, rather than outsourcing that to a PR agency or a digital agency that's just going to max out on the SEO, but you end up with something that's dried out or in corporate speak. So just to acknowledge that. But there are other things you can weave into the room as well. And again, this could be whether you're talking about purpose at a team level or an organizational level. So you might remember, if I go back to one of those other capacities, the connect on purpose, in addition to the make dialogue authentic, and you probably saw it empowered by purpose, but there's a number of purpose diamonds that I include in that book that, in my experience, can really, again, be a useful lens through which to look at purpose. So if I just speak briefly to one of those, the original one that I developed with my colleague Ed Rowland, is at the organisational level, and there's 4 points to that diamond. And so at the bottom of the diamond, if you like, in the south, there's the founding purpose of the organisation, what the company, what your SME, what your organisation was originally set up to do. Because most founders are not setting up a business just to make money. You know, there's usually some spark of inspiration. So that's the founding purpose, the founding story.
And just to interject there, Sarah, because what I always invite the participants on our own program to do, where they're second generation leaders or newly appointed MDs of a company that's been in existence for decades, if they're fortunate enough to still be in contact with the founder, if the founder's still living, I said, go and invite the founder out for a coffee. And just without any agenda, just ask that question: Why did you form this company in the first place? What was the inspiration behind this? What was the problem that you were trying to solve at the time? And just listen, because there's such richness in that conversation as well. Sorry, I just wanted to share that with you.
That's wonderful. I think that's super that you're giving that encouragement to, take the founder or the co-founders out for a coffee and get the story. And you're making me think of an organisation, it's not for profit here in the UK, called Choice Support, who help people, for example, with learning disabilities to find housing and so on. They do great work. They're going from strength to strength. Anyway, they still involve their founder. She's a woman in her 90s, I think, who still comes to meetings. She still produces reports for them. And I'm sure that's part of their ongoing success because the founder is connected with. So that is wonderful to hear. So we've got the founding purpose. And then if you come to the image of the diamond, on the horizontal axis are 2 other types of purpose at an organizational level. There is the espoused purpose, the words on the website, in the marketing literature, and so on. And then there's the lived purpose, the actual purpose that the organization is embodying regardless of what it espouses. And this is why, if we've got a gap between those 2, we get into the territory of purpose wash and so on, and that will generate real cynicism. And then just to complete the diamond, at the top, in the north, if you like, is what Ed and I called the true, most compelling or most potent purpose of the organization. You know, it's kind of North Star, if you like, that purpose that is really tapping into future potential, the best possibilities. And I think you've already touched on it in our conversation, the notion that purpose evolves and it changes sometimes as the marketplace changes. And that lens, that purpose diamond, can, in my experience, be a very useful tool for having a conversation about where we started out with our purpose, whether there are any contradictions, gaps we need to look at, and how we can evolve the purpose so we're really reaching for a North Star.
Yeah, love it. And of course, we have language around all of this now. For many leaders, there's a raw authenticity which I love to SME leaders, and what we want to encourage, which is why I love the exercise of inviting, everyone into the organization, or everyone who works for the organization, from the factory floor right up, to bring an object and share their story in their words, with their voice, and before you kind of put the corporate gloss onto this. So critically important. There's a wonderful exercise that you describe in your latest book. It's the Organisational Purpose Reality Check. Can you share what that is with our listeners? And this is such a simple exercise that could be done, before any meeting, just to really anchor that meeting so that people who are engaged in the meeting will have a dialogue through the lens of purpose. So can you share with our listeners what the Organisational Purpose Reality Check is?
Sure. And just to say where the inspiration for this came from. So this was from research done by EY, the global consulting firm. They've got a Beacon Institute there looking at purpose. And they've also collaborated with Harvard Business Review Analytic Services. Anyway, they came up with these 3 categories of organization. So this is another place to have a conversation about purpose, another way to have that. Do you see this organization, this SME, our company, as a prioritizer, where the organization's clearly understood and articulated its purpose, or as a developer, where the organization is working to develop a clear and well understood purpose, or as a laggard, where the organization is yet to begin going on that purpose journey? And again, back to some individual thinking, give people time and space to gather their thoughts, to state which category they place the organization in with a reason why. I think it really helps to encourage people to just be curious, not to get into too much sort of critical judgment here. It's just about opening up a dialogue from which you can all learn, and then open up the conversation once you've given people time to think about where you are, why you might be where you are, and what indeed the benefits might be, if you're in the place of being a laggard to becoming more of a developer, or if you're in the category of being a developer, what it would take to become more of a prioritizer, so you can really experience those benefits of purpose, such as having higher growth rates, more innovation, and so on. And just saying all of that, Brendan, it just also brings me back to the point that purpose absolutely has to be lived, in order for you to get the benefits. So part of that reality check might also be, even if we're a prioritizer and we've got the purpose clearly articulated, how are we living that? How is that manifesting in decisions we've made, or policies that we've produced, or new clients that we've acquired, or new market segments that we're aiming to lean into? That living of the purpose is the most critical piece.
So living our purpose, not laminating it is absolutely critical to ensure that purpose becomes embedded in the organization. Practically, what does that look like? Again, from a leading self, leading others, leading organizational perspective. When should we be pulling out the purpose statement? What does it look like throughout the organization?
Yeah. Well, once in the room, let's say it's in a purpose discovery session, there's a draft organizational purpose starting to emerge. There's a couple of things I'll do at that stage. So, one way of, let's say, kicking the tires of an emerging purpose statement is again to encourage individuals, even if that's at an organizational purpose statement level, is go back to the individual and say, okay, let's say that's the purpose statement, even if it still needs a bit of wordsmithing. But now think about you in your day to day role. If that's the purpose statement, what would you start doing that you're not doing? What would you stop doing that you are doing? And what would you continue to do? Start, stop, continue. And if people can respond to that question, and if they can then have a good discussion based on those three things in relation to that emerging purpose statement, then there's some substance to it. And that goes back to, and I know I've already said this, so a little bit of repetition for a moment, the very practical side of having a purpose statement, because it should be equipping managers, leaders, and frontline workers in their day to day decision making. So that's one way of just testing for that at a fairly early stage.
That is great. So really practical, and I love the stop, start, continue question in the context of being informed by the purpose statement. So before we move into the close, to kind of bring this together, what does a powerfully compelling purpose statement look like? Is it 10 sentences? Is it 10 words? Is it, what does it look like? And who are some of the exemplars in terms of some of the purpose statements that we can invite our listeners to go and look at? So what does great look like in the context of a purpose statement?
Well, I did come up with a tool for this, and I'll come to the tool in just a moment as a takeaway. I kind of standing on the shoulders of giants here, and some of the great speakers you've had, and some wonderful, truly inspiring business leaders out there. And so, I've looked across at different purpose statements. One of the what to generate the tool, which I'll come to, one of the purpose statements that comes to mind is from, and again, it's a classic case study in the purpose literature, and that is Southwest Airlines, who have been profitable for every year of their existence for, I think it's nearly 50 years now, where many of their competitors went out of business, like Pan Am. So if I remember this right, the purpose of Southwest Airlines is to connect people with what's important in their lives through friendly, reliable, low cost travel. And that rings that purpose statement. It's probably not even a dozen words, or if it's a dozen words, when you listen to that purpose statement, you know that that isn't BA or Virgin Atlantic. There's something very distinctive about that. And they are also, Southwest Airlines, really communicating the positive impact that they want to have, connecting people with what's important in their lives. So, with that statement in mind, and other great purpose statements as well, I did generate, again, it's a tool for looking at what makes a great organisational purpose. I've just talked you through it quickly. It goes by the name of magic, where the M in magic is that the purpose is meaningful. So it creates that sense of belonging for team members, for employees. They're excited or they just feel good about coming to work because the why of the organization encourages them to give of their best. That's the meaningful part. The A that we've already touched on is for authentic. So the purpose communicates what the organization commits to, not just what it espouses to do. What it commits to in terms of creating shared value. The G is for generative, so that a good organizational purpose leads to those better decisions, new possibilities. It's generative in that people can remember it as well. It's repeatable, it's memorable, and then that can be used because this is the I of magic. It's implementable. So people can use it in their day-to-day decision making to work out the start, stop, continue. And then finally, the C of magic is, I think, a great purpose and purpose statement will generate a flow of positive energy in the organization. People then pull in the same direction and you create a collaborative culture rather than people being very scattered or working in silos. So that's our magic.
Oh, you've just put a bow on an absolutely wonderful conversation. I love that. Um, I have a tradition on the show to invite from our guests, and I mean, you have already in the decades that you've been working, and I get a sense that you're really only getting started in relation to the important topic of purpose. You've led such a rich life to this stage with decades ahead of you. Sarah, can you share with our listeners three timeless takeaways?
Sure. Well, for individuals, it would be notice what lights you up, what energizes you. The future sometimes comes to us in whispers, I think, as well. So just take the time, if you notice a job ad that really grabs your attention, follow up on that. So that's one thing that has served me very well in my own journey. Go in the direction of where there's energy and resonance. I would say for teams, a takeaway would be set aside the time to talk about purpose. It's, so many teams that I coach will say, we just spend time firefighting or we get lost in the weeds. We've got to feed the beast of the board with all these reports that we need to produce, or all these metrics. But it is a false economy not to spend time talking about your enduring and meaningful why. And a takeaway for organizations, I think, would be ambitious. It isn't an easy journey to go on. It certainly isn't linear. I mean, look at the fortunes of Unilever, for example, in recent times, up and down. And so there's something about being brave to go on this journey. That question that I mentioned about where are there contradictions, where are we having rude awakenings, which we can actually learn from, would also be a very rich dialogue to have about your organizational purpose. So those would be my 3 timeless takeaways.
Oh, they've just fortified a masterclass on purpose. So thank you for those. Given the fact I've said I feel you're only getting started, what is next for you, Sarah?
Oh, well, my own business is booming, so I am busy. But that said, I am intending to carve out, if I can, more time to write come the autumn, come the winter. And what I mean, and it's a build on, I talked about how purpose can unleash that flow of positive energy in an organization. I'm very interested in the flow state. So, individuals, when you get fully absorbed in what you're doing, when you lose track of time, when you feel stretched and fully engaged. So, I want to explore more fully flow, not just though at an individual level, but at a bit like with purpose, at a team level and even an organizational level. Psychologists are really on to flow individually, but I'm interested in collective flow and how you really get that energy in a team and in an organization. So that's my best sense at the moment. I'm going to go into flow.
Oh, I absolutely love this, and look, we will absolutely stay in touch because I'd love to have you back on. I have flirted with some of the work of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, Stephen Kotler, in the whole subject area of flow. I've heard it talked about a lot at an individual level, but never at a team and organizational level. So that's going to be a wonderful journey, I suspect, for you, and certainly will deliver huge value once that work's complete. So I wish you every success with that. Sarah, if people want to find out more about you, want to connect with you and your work, where best to reach you?
So, 2 places, I'll come to those. I just want to say, Brendan, thank you very much for a super conversation and set of questions. I've got all sorts of things firing in my own mind. So, a big thank you to you. And if listeners would like to get in touch, I'm active on LinkedIn. So, find my name, put it into LinkedIn. Very happy to hear from you. And my website is also in my name. So, that's Sarah Rozenthuler.com.
Well, look, right back at you. I want to thank you, Sarah, for showing up with such beautiful energy today, for delivering such value steeped in so much wisdom and practically delivered. So thank you. I wish you every success in everything that you're doing. Your work deserves to reach many across the world, and certainly it aligns very much to us. So I wish you every success. Thank you for being such a wonderful guest today. Take care.
Thank you, Brendan.